Hello and welcome to How Money Really Works. I'm Peter.
And I'm Stephen.
But before we start, an important note. Nothing you hear on this show is financial advice. This is financial education only, and you should always seek professional advice before making any changes to your savings or investments.
So today we're looking at business rates and what proposed changes mean for pubs and hospitality and the wider political and economic backdrop shaping those decisions.
We'll start with the main news of the day before catching up with a pub landlord about what's going on the ground in that industry. But we're starting off with the main international news and how that is impacting your money. Iran, Venezuela, even Greenland. What's happening is we've seen oil prices recently pushed to near 2-month highs before they've eased. We've got Brent crude at time of recording trading in the mid-$60 barrel range. Markets are pricing geopolitical risk premiums rather than reacting to actual supply cuts. In terms of what's going on with Iran, the ongoing unrest, and the international pressure that's being applied to Tehran, well, analysts are warning the instability raises risk perception, even without any disruption to oil supply. When it comes to Venezuela, oil shipments have resumed after the disruption we saw last week. That disruption, if you remember, was an oil tanker being seized by the United States. Any sustained increase in output, though, could cap prices. But political uncertainty, well, that still remains. So, Stephen, oil prices volatile again. Geopolitical risk is clearly back in focus. What does that mean for household finances this year, particularly inflation and interest rate expectations?
Yeah, good question, Pete. Because one of those areas, I suppose, where the markets move themselves before people feel it in their pocket or anything day to day. So at a household level, oil prices don't usually hurt because petrol suddenly doubles in price. It hurts because oil acts like a silent background tax. It quietly feeds into transport, food, production, manufacturing, basically everything. And over time, that's what shows up in prices across the economy as a whole. So like right now, markets aren't really reacting to any shortages. It's more around, as you said, they're pricing in potential risk. And that keeps more pressure on inflation expectations. So if this hadn't happened, the year ahead was looking at maybe a couple of more interest rate cuts. I guess what this means is rates will be a little bit sticky for longer. And for households, that means a couple of things. First, don't expect a quick return to ultra low interest rates that we experienced in the early kind of mid-2000s. And second of all, if inflation's coming down more slowly, the cost of living pressure doesn't necessarily disappear, it just gradually eases. That's why people feel stuck, because inflation slows down, but things don't get any cheaper. With Iran and Venezuela and all these renewed trade tensions in play, how do you think that fits into the wider global order? Realistically, what are the scenarios for how this could potentially play out through the rest of 2026 at first, but broadly speaking, beyond that?
I'll take the question about the political order first. What does
You
it
know,
do to that? There is no longer a political order. It upends the political order. Donald Trump has perhaps already really done that. Venezuela's perhaps a more difficult one to immediately say how that's going to develop, because at the moment, I can't see a unified, definite plan from Donald Trump what this means in the long term. Whether it's just a moment where he's made this decision, or if he has a plan to actually take it any further. Iran is a much bigger problem, a much bigger issue. As we're recording right now, we're hearing that the United States is removing personnel from air bases in Qatar. Qatar, of course, right in that region where Iran is. But really, if the United States was to launch a military intervention, which Donald Trump certainly seems to be shaping up for at the moment, if he was to launch that intervention into Iran, then that would be a major global upsetting event. What we would be looking at would be major disruptions to oil production. We'd be looking to major disruptions to oil transportation distribution all around that Middle East area. It would cause huge ripples through energy markets. It would cause huge ripples through just about every type of market out there, because we can't get away from the fact that would be a generational event if the US was to launch that military intervention and it was to turn into any type of actual conflict. If Iran was able to defend itself in ways that other countries wouldn't be able to, that the US has launched these interventions, then it could have serious, serious ramifications. Moving on and back home to the United Kingdom, and big news that came out on Wednesday just before we started recording, that the UK plans to build, guess what? A new load of train lines, the Northern Powerhouse Rail plan, which will see £45 billion for Northern Powerhouse Rail and for Trans-Pennine Rail upgrades. Spending is going to be spread over quite a few years and subject to future spending reviews. Now, the Treasury is framing this as a long-term productivity and regional growth investment. But Stephen, when governments commit to this level of money to infrastructure, what does it usually mean for savers and taxpayers over time? Is this growth positive, or does it show up elsewhere in borrowing, inflation, taxes and the like?
I think the key phrase there is over time. So in principle, if we're going down longer term infrastructure spending, that can be very positive if it's done well, if it improves productivity. And I haven't read too much about this, but I've heard many things or many other claims over the last few years about the Northern Powerhouse, of which us in the Northeast have quite often been left as a lonely island out there close to Scotland. But if this is going to be Trans-Pennine, it's going to make that journey from presumably Newcastle to Manchester a lot quicker, would that increase regional growth? And if that happens over time, would that increase tax revenues for the country without necessarily having to raise tax themselves? So if the country grows, then that's got to be a positive thing. But the key thing is going to be over time. In the here and now, in the short to medium term, the money doesn't come from nowhere. It's either borrowed or it's moved from one part of the spreadsheet to another part in terms of other budgets, or funded through future tax receipts. For savers and taxpayers, the reality is the big infrastructure commitments like this tend to add to government borrowing first. So with the payback being pushed well into 20, 30, 50 years in the future. So if growth doesn't necessarily materialise as they hope, the costs will show up elsewhere in the normal places: tighter public spending, higher taxes, inflation staying higher for longer. So yeah, it's not a bad policy. Sounds like it's nice, a bit of a surprise to have a long-term plan. It's a good thing, but the benefits are slow, and the financing pressures, they're there straight away. And like most things, the voting public, they've got a very short attention span when it comes to, has this happened and do I feel better right now? So that probably leads, from a politics angle, how firm are promises like this politically, and what are the realistic outcomes in terms of will it ever be fully delivered, or is it going to be pushed down into the long grass like many other things we've heard?
Oof, I think look, to start off with, you can see why they've done this. Now, I don't take the train very often in the UK. You mentioned the Northeast isn't particularly well served. It's not at all. I took 3 trains over Christmas time, and I got a full refund for 2 of them and a partial refund for the other because they were so delayed over that period. So we are desperate for a revamp of the train lines, the rolling stock, every single thing. However, you're talking about a plan that both me and you will be of pensionable age before this is achieved, if it is ever achieved. This is the big issue with these type of announcements, because they sound great. Yeah, £45 billion investment plan, infrastructure. These are all the great words. Trains, we're going to get people out their cars and onto trains. Brilliant. Connectivity, all that good stuff. However, if you're working on a 5-year parliament and you're making 30, let's say even 20-year plans, quite a lot, even if your mission for that parliament is fully financed and costed, the rest of it isn't. And that's the major issue, that the UK in particular, a lot of countries across Europe do have this also. But when it comes to delivering these type of marquee gala projects, you can't do it because in 5 years' time, it might be somebody else who's Prime Minister. It might be somebody else who's Chancellor, who's making the plans and the budgets for these things. In terms of what will we get, full delivery, I wouldn't put any bets on that. Partial delivery, there'll definitely be something because they'll have to deliver something if they start spending money. Quiet delays was your other point, I think. I think we're definitely going to see those. What we end up getting, I can tell you right now, I'll bet something big. I'll give you £100, 100 British pounds, if by the time we are pensioners, this Northern Powerhouse Rail exists. There you go, Stephen. You can hold me to that.
I can hold you to that. I think it's what it's coupled with. I think if it's coupled with some kind of, and it doesn't seem to be coupled with planning reform, for the UK in particular, what's it taken 15 years to get to the point where the, what's the tunnel underneath London? Basically, get 15 years to get to the point where they are now able to make plans to build it. If it's going to take 30 years to build a nuclear power plant, it's the planning process. So if we're not getting those red tape back, and this doesn't seem to be coming hand in hand with this, I tend to agree with you there, Peter, that we shall see.
Yes, wait and see. I wouldn't be waiting for that train because you never know when that's going to turn up. Pubs are facing a critical moment. As things stand today, pubs receive a 40% reduction in business rates through retail, hospitality and leisure relief. That relief ends in April of this year.
At the same time, the full business rates revaluation comes into force. For many pubs, that means higher rateable values and even higher bills before that relief is removed.
Well, industry bodies warn this could push hundreds of pubs to close in 2026. The government has already flagged that it will step in. But as of now, there's still no confirmed policy, no legislation in place. To try and understand what this means on the ground, we're joined by David Lawrence, landlord of the Black Bear Inn in Moreton in Marsh. Dave, thanks very much for coming on. You know the current 40% relief ends in April. The re-evaluation is coming, but you don't know what replaces it. What does that uncertainty do to your day-to-day as a landlord?
There's plenty of challenges every day financially within a pub anyway. I'm sure lots of people are picking up on that vibe. Certainly, I'm sure I listened to you guys in the first week, kind of that uncertainty is exactly the same for us as it is for markets and investments and stuff across everything, really. Probably a little bit more fragile because the cash flow is so bad within hospitality. It's unbearable, really.
I mean, you say it's unbearable. What's it doing to you, really?
You wouldn't believe looking on the camera that I'm only 40-year-old. that probably tells you everything that you need to know, unfortunately. In real terms, the pub is where my family live. My parents live above it. That's scary, you know. Family comes first, as I'm sure everyone kind of agrees with. And to think that my 76-year-old old man and me 60-year-old mother might be homeless. Yeah, not a nice position to be in, really.
Well, all I was going to say before that sounds really tough. Then when the business rates bill does go up, what does that actually force you to think about?
Stephen, there isn't an answer to it because everyone has an expectation of the price of a meal. You can't price yourself out of the market because if you do, people don't come in. The average profit by the time that you've paid your VAT, by the time you've paid your business rates, your gas, your electric, your staff, everything you can imagine, the average profit is 15 to 20 pence on every pint.
But why is the business rates the one that's getting the headlines at the moment?
Because the problem with it is you have your big chains, you have the people who can absorb this and the other, but us independents, this is a different world from Mr. Tim Martin, who's got Wetherspoons, who can absorb things left, right, and centre, who has purchasing power within things, who, you know, you know exactly what you're getting when you go to Wetherspoons. It's a £5 breakfast. You don't complain about it because it's £5, but every ingredient that he buys through the door, because it's already pre-cooked, he can claim 20% VAT back. You come to people like me who believe in getting an onion, turn it into red onion marmalade, which takes me on average 10 hours to make a substantial batch. I can't claim a penny, but as soon as that's hit the pan, I get hit with 20% VAT.
There is talk in Westminster about a possible pub-specific relief. What type of thing that could make a big difference?
The The problem with the rateable value is the calculator and how they're doing it. It's a very antiquated system. So the calculator itself, as you'll have seen with some people, they have got 115, 170% increases. That is just unviable. Realistically, Stephen, if there's one thing that would save this industry, hospitality in general, it is a VAT specific relief. It will be a 10% relief for possibly a year, possibly 18 months. And then after that, back to 13%. After COVID, our rateable value at the pub was £22,500. We were closed for 9 months solid, which was tough in terms of the social aspect, let alone a business aspect. But our rateable value then jumped up to 47,000. Stephen, you're the maths guy. 22,500 to 47,000. This time round, as from April, we go 47,000 to 53.
I think civilians like myself who've got no idea either about rateable values or about running a pub would be wondering, you hear these numbers announced for the bills that people are going to have to pay. Do you just get a check through from HMRC saying chop chop?
Yeah, still it's on over the course of the year. But last year, before the rateable value discount came in, we were round about £468 a month. And as from this year, jumped up because all the discounts and stuff had ended. I've just paid one the other day, actually, 1,636. So 400% increase.
If nothing is done, what happens to the pub business in the next 5 or 10 years?
I don't think it exists. I unfortunately don't think it exists through people's habits and being priced out of the market. I just don't think we have any left, if I'm honest with you.
Oh, well, many thanks to David for coming on there, but wow, that's got to be tough in that business right now.
Yeah, the reality or the realism when you hear it's all numbers. So many publicans, this much of the economy. He's got his mum upstairs and his daughter. It's a real person with a real business, just trying to make a go of it. And that's the bit that hits home. There's real people at the heart of this. I'm really hopeful that something is going to be announced to help people in Dave's position as well.
So, Stephen, listeners who aren't pub owners, how do these costs show up in every life? The prices, jobs, and local services as well?
Yeah, so the key point is business costs don't stay with the businesses themselves. They move and they shift onto somebody else, the consumer. So when fixed costs like business rates jump, businesses themselves have got very limited options. They either raise prices, cut staff hours, reduce services, or ultimately close. So for listeners, this shows up in higher prices when you go for your meal out, or why is that taking longer to be served to my table? Because there's fewer staff on shift, less opening hours, and then sadly fewer independent businesses who are looking at, is it worth me taking the risk? I'm the one carrying the can for all of this and paying everybody. Is it worth me getting out of bed to start this? The math doesn't start to add up. Fewer entry-level jobs, especially for younger people who are the kind of the backbone of the service industry. And over time, the sad thing will be you see less competition on the high street, more kind of homogenous brands, and ultimately that pushes prices further up. Choice disappears. Yeah, so I guess that's where we're at. It's not a very positive news story, really.
Well, it's not, and there isn't a lot of positive news. Sadly, it does seem like we are staring down the barrel of a very, very tough time for the pub business. Hopefully, not a fatal time, though.
The flip side of that, again, bringing it back to politics, has the government boxed themselves in here, Peter? So are we more likely to see a full extension or just something specifically targeted at pubs? I know Dave was talking about doing something around about targeted VAT changes. Have they got any movement?
We heard it with the story about the proposed infrastructure investment. Yeah, on the surface, that looks like a great story. But when you start looking into it and you start looking at the track record of governments being able to actually do something to ease the pain in these, then I don't see with this particular instance there's going to be anything they can do that will make everybody not even happy, accepting. Because you're talking about, hundreds, a pub a day closing, leading to hundreds of pubs, around 360 odd pubs. But 2,000 venues. Now, that's an awful lot of other venues that aren't pubs, that won't get any preferential treatment, whatever that is, that will run the risk of going out of business and closing. If I was in one of those businesses, I'd be extremely upset that the pub's going to get it. But of course, the pub has that emotional attachment to people across the UK. I mean, I'm a non-drinker myself. I haven't drank in years. I still love a pub. I loved going to hang out in the pub, going to meet people in the pub. So yes, they will be desperate to try and find something. However, I'm not sure it's anything that's going to bring too much cheer to a very gloomy industry right now. Moving on now to other stories happening this week. UK inflation, well, it's not going as they want it to. It's currently above the Bank of England's 2% target. Services inflation is remaining sticky, to use the language that they like to use. It's been driven by wages and domestic costs. The Bank of England base rate remains at 5.25%, with policymakers cautious on cuts. So what does that mean for households and borrowing? Well, millions of UK households continue to roll off low-rate fixed mortgages. Mortgage rates currently remain well above pre-2022 levels. That means that anybody getting back into a mortgage or re-upping their mortgage, you're going to end up paying more money every month out. And that means household budgets remain under pressure from housing, food and energy. So for UK households, if inflation stays above target and rates stay higher for longer, what should people realistically expect for mortgages, savings and the day-to-day costs over the next month, couple of months, the next year?
So the plan for the year ahead, as per the Bank of England, was potentially the rates may edge down a little more. But the era of ultra cheap borrowing, I think you need to think that's well behind us now. I was with a client this morning and we're talking something different. I've got a chart which kind of shows investment performance and interest rates as well, but over quite a long period, back to the mid-80s. And as I was showing him, he went, oh, look at that, interest rates, they were high then. And yes, the word high, I think where we are today, interest rates in that 3.5% to 4.5% bracket, that was historically the norm. We've been outside of the norm for the last decade. I think we need to get used to what that looks like now. Is these are the interest rates that we need to be dealing with. On savings, it's the flip side of that. So actually, higher rates or rates remaining higher for longer mean that cash savings accounts and short-term bonds still offer some competitive rates. In reality, my day job, looking at what the cost of living does to your savings, inflation's eating away at the buying power. So that's the effect longer term. And really where people feel stuck in day-to-day costs, inflation easing doesn't mean things are getting cheaper. So the pressure doesn't disappear, just becomes a little less intense or noticeable. Big shift for households is, when will things go back to normal? I think we are in the new normal now, depending upon, as the rest of the show's talked about, the effects of geopolitical things. Doesn't take very much to kind of knock us off track. And yeah, from your perspective, Pete, politically, the UK government's being squeezed between high debt, weak growth, and feeling the pressure from the voters. What are the realistic policy options for me? It sounded like earlier there wasn't very many at all.
The government has to make a choice between speed, fairness and fiscal credibility, how it acts on this. It can't have all three. And when it takes away from one of those to give to another, it diminishes the one it takes away from so much. So ultimately, what we'll probably see is some type of targeted help for specifically vulnerable members of society, groups within society. However, again, this is going to be one of those where whatever the government does, whatever government does when it tries to do these things with the state of play at the moment, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they're having to take from some to give to others. And it's up to them to make those decisions about what requires that funding at the moment and what doesn't.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode of How Money Really Works.
If you found this useful, get in touch with us on social media, ask us questions and suggest topics you would like to see us dig into next. All of our links are in the show notes.
As a reminder, nothing on this show is financial advice. This is financial education, and professional advice always matters.
We'll be back next week with more on what's shaping markets, policy, and your money. See you then.